evening. You're watching Left, Right and Centre. I'm Nidhi Razdan. On the show this evening, a legendary writer and journalist is no more. Khushwant Singh died today at the age of 99, passing away peacefully in his sleep. Over the next hour, we look at the legacy of a man who inspired generations, who made us laugh with his wit and wicked humour, and who shocked us with his defence of the emergency and praise for Sanjay Gandhi. What will Khushwant Singh's legacy be? Tonight, some of India's best-known writers join us: Vikram Seth, Guha, William Dalrymple and Davidar. That's coming up in just a bit. Let's take a look at the life and times of Khushwant Singh.
Here lies one who spared neither man nor God. Waste not your tears on him, he was a sod. Writing nasty things he regarded as great fun. Thank the Lord he's dead, this son of a gun. Khushwant Singh writing his own epitaph at 28. Novelist, historian, journalist, etched in the heart of millions for his sharp wit and love of poetry. Known for classics like Train to Pakistan, Delhi and the History of Sikhs, Khushwant Singh published his autobiography Truth, Love and a Little Malice in 2002. Whether writing about watching porn in Hawaii with novelist R.K. Narayanan or Santa Banta jokes, or then his famous line, "There's no condom for a pen," Khushwant Singh's acerbic humour was well known and well suffered. His most controversial moment, defending the emergency imposed by Indira Gandhi as necessary to suppress violence. Years later, writing in the Outlook magazine in 2000, he said,
"What went wrong was the misuse. And Mrs. Gandhi set a bad example by settling personal scores. You get two women who worked organizing farm labor in her farm. They were arrested and put in jail."
Suffering from respiratory trouble in the past few weeks, he passed away on Thursday morning, aged 99.
बिल्कुल शांति के साथ गए और आज तक बातचीत कर रहे थे और अखबार पढ़े थे. आज सवेरे उन्होंने अखबार भी पढ़ा था और किताबें भी पढ़ते थे.
You know, he had his single malt and one drink and his ghalib. I think that's what really gave him a lot of solace in the...
Born on the 2nd of February 1915 in today's Pakistan, Khushwant Singh held his Sikh identity dear with a deep sense of belonging, returning the Padma Bhushan in 1984, protesting against Operation Blue Star. In 2007, he was awarded the Padma Vibhushan. Writing on everything from politics and history to poetry, Khushwant Singh inspired many journalists as editor of the Illustrated Weekly of India, the National Herald and the Hindustan Times. His weekly column, With Malice Towards One and All, was syndicated in several publications and continued until a few years ago. A nominated member of Parliament from 1980 to 1986, he woke at 4 a.m. every day and wrote his column by hand. Sonia Gandhi and the Prime Minister visited his family today and hundreds attended his funeral.
Remembered atmosphere of his presence, larger than life and therefore larger than death. He was without what you could call malicious malice.
They make certain great men and then they break the mold, and he was one of those. He would say things the way he saw it, you know. He tried to be truthful.
If I were Khushwant Singh, I think I would say to myself, I wanted to write something. I want to write about good things that were happening. I wanted to write freely about bad things that were happening. I wasn't afraid of anyone. I didn't take anyone too seriously. I took the people of my country seriously. I took the people of Pakistan also seriously, where I was born, where I was raised, Lahore, Sargodha and so forth. I was fond of humanity. I had my share of foibles.
Well, as I said earlier today, perhaps Khushwant Singh's life is one that must be celebrated rather than mourned. He was a man who clearly lived life on his own terms. He lived it his way and perhaps died his own way peacefully in his sleep this morning. Let's go across to our wonderful panel this evening. First, we have William Dalrymple and Davidar joining us tonight, and Tavleen Singh here in the studio with us. I thought I'd begin by asking all of you your own personal experiences first with Khushwant Singh. And Mr. Davidar, to you first. I believe you first met him when you were only 19 or 20 years old. Tell us about that.
Well, you know, I mean, I think there have been many tributes paid to him, but the thing that has always struck me was here was a man of tremendous achievement, a member of the elites, and none of that ever affected the way he dealt with people. I was in my mid-20s when I met him, and he was already at the height of his fame and power, and he treated me with incredible generosity, and that was not special to me. I mean, everybody he met, there's a tremendous amount of humility and curiosity and generosity. So those are the attributes that struck me immediately.
And anything in particular that he inspired you to do as a writer yourself? Because that's something that, you know, as I spoke to a number of writers today, they kept saying to me that he encouraged us. So he encouraged people to write, and even, you know, personally sort of intervened and stepped in and said, no, you know, you have to do this and you have to finish this book. Was it like that with you as well? Did he inspire you personally in your career?
Well, for sure. I mean, you know, that was the generosity I was talking about. Here was I was doing my first publishing job, my first editing job of any consequence, and you know, he treated me like an equal. He encouraged me to do. He pushed me to do various things, and you know, there was something about his writing that is incredibly difficult to achieve for most writers, which was an essential clarity of thought and simplicity of prose. You know what I mean? Those are very, very complex and complicated things to do, and he managed it effortlessly. He was an effortless writer.
William Dalrymple, what do you say about a man who wrote his own epitaph when he was 28 years old and called himself a sod? And, you know, wrote, in fact, in his last book that, you know, he was waiting to die now. He just, you know, he'd lived his life, he was waiting to die. How do you remember a man like that, who just didn't fail to laugh at himself and didn't take himself too seriously?
I just remember him as a terrific life enhancer. Even into his mid-80s, you would go to that flat in Sajjan Singh Park, and there'd always be people there in the evening. There'd be a bottle of whiskey, there would be bon ami. As David said, he was an enormously generous man. When I was also in my 20s writing City of Jinns, he was writing a book on Delhi as well, and you know, in a sense, you know, I was a kind of modest rival, and he might have not wanted to help or blocked me, but whenever I wanted to know anything about Delhi, I could go there, and he'd sent me off, introduced me to people, gave me ideas, and I mean, just endlessly kind and encouraging and witty and life enhancing. When he went to see Khushwant, you knew you were going to have a good time, have a good laugh. I mean, there's endless good stories about Khushwant. I remember him well into his early 80s, not exactly seducing, but certainly hitting on my mother-in-law when we took her around there for a drink. And my mother-in-law was a woman of a certain age. Khushwant held her hand, caressed her at the back of her arm, and started reciting Shakespeare's sonnets at her. I don't think she'd had that from anybody for about 40 or 50 years. And she went away absolutely charmed by him.
She found that charming, and I think, in fact, he said that one of his regrets was that he was a bit of a lech. He called himself a lech. He said that pretty much from the age of 4 or 5 to the age of 97, that's how he was.
Well, my mother-in-law certainly loved him. I think the person she most enjoyed meeting in all of India. But he was just a lovely man, you know, and right up until the end, he was engaged. He would read a book a week. He had this great rule about not staying late at publishing parties. And one of the great sights of Delhi publishing in the kind of 90s was Khushwant arriving, making whatever speech or shaking whatever hands he had to. And then he would take a great plate of canapes and pour them into a plastic bag and go off and eat them on the car home, rather than staying to the bitter end. And as the introduction said, he was absolutely rigorous with himself about getting up at 4 or 5 in the morning, going for a walk, and be writing by 6, which was how he was so incredibly prolific right through to the end. One book of his that hasn't been mentioned so far is his wonderful biography of Ranjit Singh. That's one of my favourite of his works. I reread it again last year when I was doing Return of a King, and it's a wonderful pen portrait. So he was a man of many gifts: a columnist, historian, biographer, novelist, diplomat, and an enviable wide range of talents.
Tavleen Singh, your personal memories of Khushwant Singh. And this was a man who really wasn't afraid to offend anyone. He said what he wanted to. I don't think he really even cared what his friends thought. What he believed in, he said it. He did it.
Well, you know, it was very refreshing that he didn't take himself too seriously, because what's boring about most writers is they take themselves too seriously. But with me, on a serious note, you know, I can never forget the fact that I might never have written a book if it hadn't been for him. Because when I was doing my first book in the 90s, around 95, I think, I went to him and said, you know, I can't find a publisher, and what am I supposed to do with this? And I said, can you just read this book, the book on Kashmir? Can you read it and tell me what I should do? And he got me in touch with David, and you know, actually I think almost press gang David into buying the book, you know. So I have that, as well as the fact that, you know, we come from Delhi families. Khushwant, I mean, he did come from, his father was the best friend of my grandfather, and they were among those 5, 6 and there was, I think there was one Muslim who built the city of New Delhi with, you know, Falatians. And we used to always joke about the fact that, you know, he remembered my grandfather. So, you know, he was full of stories of Delhi as it was then. So I will, you know, really cherish the memories I have of conversations with him.
Let's talk about the more controversial aspects of his legacy, though. And one of them, and Tavleen, you'd be the best person to talk about this perhaps, is his relationship with the Gandhis and his admiration for Sanjay Gandhi, who he admired right through the emergency. He justified Indira Gandhi's emergency as well, and many saw that as a blot on his reputation. What would you say?
Anyone who did was just being small-minded, because in fact I talked to him often about that. And one of the things about Khushwant, I think, that is not very well known, is that he was never very political, and he saw political issues in quite a naive way. He saw a history in a deep way, but current affairs in a much more flippant sort of way. So he thought of Sanjay as somebody who would bring a change to India, a change that everybody knew that India needed. And so he backed him at that point, and, you know, backed the emergency. A lot of people who were not...
He also did gushing cover stories on Sanjay Gandhi at that time.
Yeah, well, you see, maybe, you know, it was a very bleak time. Things were going wrong. There was a great, you know, there was confusion and indiscipline all over the country. And a lot of people felt that in the beginning there were other supporters of the emergency, and if you weren't political, and if you weren't a political journalist, it would have been easy to be fooled into thinking that the emergency was a good thing. And I think that he was fooled, but he was happy enough to admit that maybe he was fooled.
Was he fooled, William Dalrymple? Do you think he was fooled, or is that too simplistic? When he wrote about Sanjay Gandhi many years later, he described him as a lovable gunda, and you know, he said he had brawls, he stole cars, you know, or he was very courteous towards people like me. You know, he has a lot of praise for him, and then goes on to describe him as a lovable gunda. Do you really think he was politically naive?
I think he probably was. I think Tavleen's right. I mean, it certainly wasn't one of the great sort of high points of his journalistic career, backing Sanjay. But you know, he had a very, very long life. He wrote columns over a period of 40 years, and I think to write him off because of a blunder in one moment of his life is unfair. I remember him most lovingly as just for the man he was. The pleasure of his company, in a sense, was the greatest gift he had, I think, and that's the way I'd love to remember him, certainly.
Davidar, how do you see his legacy as far as the emergency and Sanjay Gandhi are concerned? Do you think that's something that is a blot, or as both William Dalrymple and Tavleen Singh are saying, just that he was a politically naive man, but he was also a leading journalist and an editor?
Well, I mean, as Willie said, I mean, I think you have to balance it with things that he did across his career, right? I mean, I think he lived by the principle, to thine own self be true, and what he believed he said, you know, and you can't judge a man for that. I mean, I think you have to look at the other things that he looked at, you know, the Golden Temple, you know, Blue Star, a lot of other things that he was absolutely courageous about. I remember a public meeting once where he accosted Mr. Advani and said to him, I hold you responsible for the Babri Masjid disaster. And, you know, I thought that was extremely courageous. I mean, and this was, don't forget this, this was the man who actually signed Mr. Advani's nomination papers. So, you know, there are other aspects of his very long journalistic career and career as a public intellectual, and if you like, one of the people I regard as I used to regard as the conscience of the nation. I mean, he spoke what he felt was true, and I think we need to honor him for that.
It's interesting you say that, because you're right that when Blue Star happened, he returned his Padma Award, and he was very clear that he blamed the Congress's top leadership for what happened in 1984. So, as you say, he wasn't afraid to speak out on the issues that he felt, you know, that he had conviction about. It didn't matter who he was close to politically.
Indeed, and we need people like that.
Yeah. I'll take that to Tavleen as well, because in 1984 he actually said, I felt like a Jew in a Nazi camp at the time. Very strong words, where again he attacked the top leadership of the Congress, and he was asked in this interview in 2005 that Harinder Baweja did for Tehelka, in fact, that his closeness to the Gandhis was also much exaggerated, but he didn't mince his words on who he felt was responsible. He's also a Sikh historian, and how do you think, you know, he reconciled with what happened in 84 to his closeness with the Gandhis and his identity as a Sikh in this country?
When 1984 happened, there were very few people, very few Sikhs who would dare to speak out against Sant Bhindranwale.
And
right?
he was one of them.
And he was one of them. And he was under threat for that. Because, you know, Bhindranwale actually put a thing out to sort of have him killed. And he had to be under protection the whole time. But I talked to him about it afterwards, and you see what he felt, and I agree with him totally, he was right about that, in fact, was that there was no need to go into the Golden Temple and kill so many people to end this problem, because it was actually a political problem that was mishandled and didn't need a military solution. And that he could see very clearly. And, you know, so he wasn't afraid to take both sides. He spoke up very much against Bhindranwale, often, and criticized him and said to him that he didn't understand Sikhism, which was a very brave thing to do. I mean, a lot braver than actually taking on the Gandhis, because, you know, he could have been killed for that. But what happened in 1984, when he saw all around him Sikhs being killed in the streets of Delhi, that affected him very deeply. And, you know, he wasn't afraid.
Did that affect him up even today in terms of how he saw the Congress today and its leadership today? Do you believe that?
I actually, you know, towards the later part of his life, I didn't talk about politics with him. I would go and have a drink and talk about love and life and, you know, music and poetry. And, you know, I can't remember a political discussion.
I wish I had, because David Davidar, I wish that in this time of Arvind Kejriwal, Narendra Modi versus Rahul Gandhi, it would have been fascinating to know what Khushwant Singh, you know, thought about politics today. He was a very politically, he certainly kept up with the politics of the times, even if he was politically naive himself, as Tavleen says.
But I think Tavleen is right. I think, you know, in his later years, he turned very philosophical. He was, for a man who was an agnostic, he, you know, knew the scriptures. He, one of the books that he published a couple of years ago was just full of a lot of ruminations on what life meant, what religion means, etc., etc., etc. It was very contemplative, his, you know, the last 5 or 10 years of his life, I think. That's the way I read it.
Well, you know, it's very interesting, because when you look at his book, The Lessons of My Life, and you look at, you know, what you need to do in order to live a long life, it's actually really very simple. You know, he talks about 12 tips to live a long, happy life, and one of them is brisk walking, cutting down your intake of food and drink, which, as Tavleen Singh and I were discussing, is a bit hard, and never to tell a lie, not to lose your temper, to laugh, and take up a hobby like gardening or music. Very simple, but I guess it worked. It worked for him, and these are the simple tips that perhaps one could live by. David, Davidar, Tavleen Singh and William Dalrymple, it was lovely to talk to you tonight. Thank you very much for coming in this evening.